So, how are things there? Plessy, hi. Stan, how you doing?
Hi, how are you, Dan?
Good, good. I am enjoying a Saturday morning. It's the last 4 weeks of the semester coming up, so it is what it is.
And I've got the 5 units left of my current module, and then the EMA in about 6 weeks. No, in a month. Yeah, 6 weeks.
Yeah. So yeah, but whatever. We'll just keep pushing forward.
So my last assignment was what and not being well was like the main reason why I haven't been able to do my reading yet. Because I had to take priority because I had a double extension for it. So
yeah. I have been struggling with a new. I'm teaching a couple of new courses this semester that I don't have. Lectures and readings and everything sort of in the can. So that's always a different kind of a thing. Nice. Yep, I got mine ready to go. Actually, now it's kind of funny. I have to. This is the last empty page, so I've got to start taking some pictures and doing some filing with this.
Yeah.
So how do you like it, Dan? How do you like the Rocket Book?
I like it. I like it a lot. Thank you for suggesting it. It is, I was taking notes on my my iPad, and I had gotten the paper-like screen thing so that it felt a little bit more like paper, but it didn't really feel that much like paper. And I don't really do that much drawing. I do more, sort of note taking in meetings and oh, hi Gary. Oh, hey, good to see you, or not see you. Either way, it's fine. Hey Tracy, Pat. So yeah, so we were just talking. About Rocketbook, which sort of Stan mentioned last time, introduced me to. I wasn't really aware of it. Hey, Ann. So I've been, I actually got I got the little box of note cards too, because settle costing and all that. Have not used a single one, but I'm considering it. Yeah. So what do you use them, Stan? What do you use them for?
I actually do use them for taking notes as I'm reading on books, and I picture capture them and then file them electronically. Mm-hmm. Mixed in, so so the Zettelkasten is kind of multimedia, it's text, and also the images from the Rocketbook cards. Mm-hmm. But I always have the Rocketbook cards, with me, so I can always capture something.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then you, so you don't really rely on the OCR then. You actually you keep a permanent, actually photo of the card.
Yeah, because I've noticed the OCR of my handwriting is not perfect. It's not very good. Yeah.
I'm thinking of getting those cards as well to help train me in order to write succinct notes for when I actually start my physical anti-net settle cards. Scott P. Shepard, who calls it anti-net. So I want to start a physical settle custom eventually, but I need to train myself to write proper notes in a meaningful way. So
Mhm. Well, that might make them a really good sort of a transitional object. Yeah. Yeah. So should we begin by sort of introducing ourselves? Because I don't know that everybody has been in every group so far. So that might be useful. So anyone object to that? Okay, we'll do. Oh, there's Chris. So I guess I will start. I'm Dan Alasso. I teach history at a little university, which is really not that much bigger than a college, in northern Minnesota. And I am doing a bunch of different research. I'm very excited right now because I've started doing some research once again on some transatlantic secular radicals in mostly after the time of Thomas Paine, but in that same tradition, and so they, sort of throughout the early 19th century, especially, are sort of bopping back and forth across the Atlantic. I just discovered, I emailed, because it's 2022, I emailed a guy at York University who had written extensively about it in the 70s and 80s and 90s, Edward Royal, and he responded to me, and he invited me to join this new organization that's based in London, I believe, and I participated in a Zoom meeting with them, and in which one of the members was talking about his new book. So it does seem like it's a small community, but there is some energy going on. So I am sort of happily building a new Obsidian vault on these things and publishing it out to publish as well. So I'm having a lot of fun with that, and I'm trying to use these tools. And also yet another ball to try to keep in the air this time as the semester ends. So why don't I nominate the next person, and why don't we go to Stan, because you're up and to the right of me on my screen.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks, Dan. I'm Stan Dunn, and I've had the privilege of participating in now what I think is the third Obsidian Book Club, and really, enjoyed immensely the first two, and looking forward to the third one. I have some interesting comments on these first readings. I'm the Dean of the Graduate School at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, which is a small private technological university in upstate New York, if you're not familiar with it. My home discipline is in engineering, and I guess when we get to discuss the books, that that will leak into some of the comments that I'll make about about effective knowledge, and it kind of surprised me how how much it resonated with the way I taught when I had been teaching, and been a bureaucrat for so many years now. I haven't had that much time in the classroom, but have very much enjoyed these, and getting to know everybody, and hats off to Dan for keeping us together, and with some very interesting books, and looking forward to these too. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Who should go next?
How about Plessy?
Thank you, Dan. I am right now. I am an architect who I'm living in Kuwait. I'm from India, but I live in Kuwait and work in Kuwait. And why I joined the first book club was because I was interested in getting the book read and to increase my interaction with Obsidian. It has not really increased, even though I've gone through 2 of the book clubs. But I just want to keep reading and finding hopefully sometime when I'll actually read something. Mainly, I'm interested in reading about theology and stuff like that. So right now, there's this book which is a really huge book by someone who's called Ian Gilchrist. He wrote a book there which I want to read, which is like huge. So I hope by being in this group, I'll finally come to reading it in sometime. Okay, and I am nominating Toran Shaw.
So I had to unmute, and it's right at the other end of the screen. Doran, I'm from to the side of pond on the in the West Country, and it's my second book club, and currently in the process of completely reorganizing my Obsidian Vault to take more into account the set of custom structure out with my own numbering scheme and all that stuff. And also trying to help you to try out the new Readwise Reader app. So that's going well. And so not really. I think that's it for the moment. And if I'm a bit distracted at the moment, it's just my team are currently playing Chelsea. So
Okay.
And it's currently 1-1. So I just want to sort of try and get a lot out of the book club, and hopefully trying to start doing more note taking, intentional note taking.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Thank you. Okay, so you want to nominate somebody to go next?
Anne?
Hello. Hi, I'm Anne Bacon. This is my second book club. I am very sorry. I kind of tailed off on Dawn of Everything Club, and I'm still on chapter 4 of Dawn of Everything. It's a very big book. I didn't really know who Hobbes or Rousseau were, so that didn't help. But it's important, and I've made a start. And I will eventually finish it because it's a great book. I am back because I have actually read these books. I've read both of them. So that's much better start, I think. And I'm particularly interested in my background is in STEM. I was a chemist, have academic background in physical chemistry, and then I worked in the publishing industry for a long time. Editing academic journals, and then building software to facilitate academic workflow, like the workflows. So super interested. I will kind of short circuit some stuff and say that I really loved Anne and Blair's book, Too Much to Know. I think it's a tour de force, and I'm really looking forward to discussing that one with everyone. And then Annie Murphy Paul's book, I'm very interested as a layperson, really, in this 4E cognition. So embodied, extended, embedded, and active. Yeah. But I am not a fan, I think, of Annie Murphy Paul's book. So yeah, looking forward to discussing all of that with everyone. Who is yet to go? Tracy.
Hey, everyone. So I'm Tracy Castillo. I missed the Dawn of Everything book club, which I would have enjoyed greatly, but then I found you all, so that's been great. My background, let's see, I was trained as an ecologist, actually, back in the day. but I ended up not going into either academia or sort of environmental profession. I ended up homeschooling my kids and got very involved with classical education, and then sort of went back to school, and I have a couple degrees in theology. So I've studied a lot of history, pre-modern cultures, languages. So the Blair books looks interesting to me from that perspective. Really what I enjoyed about the last book club was digging into Obsidian, which I've just kind of started doing, but I've learned tremendous amounts, not only about just how the platform works, but also how to use it, what to use it for. And I have many ongoing experiments on that. I sort of fell off the Zettelkasten bandwagon during the course of the last book club. But I'm always open to being reconvinced about that and about how to use Obsidian. So yeah, the intellectual history kind of combined with practical applications in note-taking and research and writing really attracts me to the present books. So, and I'm also excited about, eventually getting back into, kind of history of culture, economy, politics, religion, kind of the general historical writings, big history as well. So it's great to see you all again, and nice to meet you, Anne. Oh, and I apologize. I'm going to turn my screen off because I have things going on in the background and don't want to distract you all.
Okay, and who should go next?
Let's take Patrick.
Yes, thanks, Tracy. I was thinking of nominating you if I got the chance. We've had good discussions in the group, and I'm a retired chemical engineer, worked for 3 major chemical companies, Dow, Huntsman, and Imperial Chemical Company Industries in London. I live in sunny Florida, and you all in the north have my sympathies for the winter you've had.
Thank you.
I also spent some time in the Air Force, worked on rocket propellants out at Edwards Air Force Base, which was a very interesting tour. I've been a lifelong advocate and interest in what you might call a second brain, as Tiago does. And I find this book club very interesting, particularly the shared vault that Dan has put together, and seeing you all on Zoom. So I look forward to many of our discussions, and I will nominate Chris next.
From the West Coast, I'm just outside Los Angeles in the Cold Mountain area, at least this morning. I have a background, like it sounds like about half of the group here. I have degrees in biomedical and electrical engineering. And then I naturally spent 20 years in the entertainment industry. And I'll say my claim to fame this week was coming up with the idea for the movie Hitch, starring Will Smith. But of course, no one cares about my opinions on the brouhaha this last week.
But Hitch was a good movie.
Yeah, it was a fun little thing. I pitched that thing 400 times before somebody picked it up, and it took me moving companies like 3 times before I found somebody who said, "Oh, that's kind of cool." But I've spent a chunk of my time doing research in intellectual traditions. I've done a lot of research into memory as it impinges on Western history. And lately I have been digging into, over the last couple of years, the ideas of commonplace books, Zettelkasten, and notebooks, note-taking in general. And some of that has dovetailed into the space of indigenous peoples and how they use memory and orality creatively in their cultures. So several of our books in the book club have dovetailed with those quite nicely. I don't know who comes up with these ideas, but they're genius. I'll give the credit to Dan, but it's actually, I think, the whole group. So I always appreciate that. And these two particular books are, at the top of my nerd list lately. So I will nominate, I think we're down to 2 people. I'm going to go with Gary because I don't know Gary and I at least know John. So I'm tipping you off, Gary, that John, I think, is the last one.
Okay, yeah, I was trying to pay attention. Yeah, thanks for having me, Dan, and everyone here. I just opened the vault a little bit last night, and it's just so well organized. And so I have a background. Do I even have a degree? I think I have a degree. I studied architecture and then eventually bounced around a little bit and started doing manual therapy, and then stumbled upon acupuncture and electrical stimulation. So and I was trying to learn. I tried to learn some memory techniques to help me learn traditional points and to complement it with a little bit of the Western peripheral neurology. And so Annie Murphy's Paul, I read it last year. It had some, it was of interest to me. And then I think she made some interesting points about the functional physiologist who was a trader. And those are kind of nervous system signs that we're supposed to observe as well, be able to observe on patients when we're assessing. So a lot of those things, that the way the biology, peripheral nervous system, autonomic nervous system, and that how that affects the way we think and learn, as I'm finding that fascinating. And I'm trying to learn to get comfortable using Obsidian and learning to read and make notes in more meaningful and synthesize ideas better, and struggling with that. So hoping to get some tips from everyone here. That's it. Thank you. I'll pass it on to John.
Good morning, everyone. My name is John Wilkins. I'm a retired math professor. I live in the San Gabriel Valley, just east of LA, and I have a degree in philosophy and math, and my PhD is in math education. So I've taken a lot of ed psych classes. So the extended mind was very interesting, and look forward to getting into more of it. But my ultimate goal is to become more efficient in taking notes and trying to link things together in Obsidian. I've read just literally hundreds of books about the history of philosophy, or history of mathematics, which is what I'm still teaching online. And but they're sort of, silos unto themselves. And so I want to learn more about how to connect those things. So looking forward to this book club. Dan?
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. So I think this will be, and obviously we'll probably be joined by other people who I did notice that Simon and Lewis had mentioned they're not able to join today, but so we'll have some more people as we move on. I think it's kind of interesting that we've got the 4 E's in the Paul book, we've got the 4 S's in the other book, but it'll be interesting to kind of explore what it was that really didn't turn you on about the way that Paul kind of presented. And I kind of, as my first experience with this was with the Paul book was listening to it and I think she narrates it herself on Audible, and so as I'm walking, I walk out on the roads and listen to books, and it did seem very it seemed like there was an element of excitement that she was trying to insert into it. But yeah, Gary, I think that the biology and thinking connection will be interesting. That fascinates me as well. And that there was a little bit of some of the stuff that we talked about during the Dawn of Everything discussions was a little bit adjacent to that. Yeah, so I think this will be fun. We will have to, when this of course goes to when this vault ends up being published, we will have to remove the PDFs. But right now, the PDFs are out there in the vault, and that does mean that they're accessible by way of hypothesis. And Chris, I noticed that you have annotated extensively in the extended mind. So do we?
Yeah, I started reading them both on Kindle, and I have since gotten alternate versions because I prefer hypothesis, honestly. But so if folks are interested, certainly jump in and go that route.
Yeah,
if you need help figuring out how to get your notes out of hypothesis and into things, you can do that.
I probably, I haven't set up a group in hypothesis. I could do that actually, and that would, maybe give us a little bit more privacy. Chris, that doesn't help you out with respect to the stuff that you've already done. I'm not sure. I've never tried moving any type of bulk move of a set of annotations from public to a private folder.
It's doable, but there's some hoops you have to jump through to do it.
Okay. I will, I will make a hypo folder today. Because I would, actually, I'd be a little bit more comfortable given that these are, this is copyrighted stuff. And I kind of feel like I'm almost legal when I do things inside of a private folder in hypothesis, and then I can at least claim fair use. Although whole text, it's probably still not.
I will mention, and I would presume based on past groups, everyone has a physical copy of this or bought a copy or multiple copies. I think some of us may be like Dan and bought an actual copy and an audiobook copy. But because of the way it's hiding, unless you give somebody the full root URL to the book, hypothesis won't reveal where it's at or allow access to it unless you know what the URL is. So you can see permalinks to the notes themselves if you share them, but they won't actually be able to see the book unless you say, here's the URL to the book, if that makes sense. So it's hiding to some extent.
So if I were to copy this, this URL, which is Chrome extension, etc., are you saying you think that would?
Well, the Chrome extension part isn't even a URL. That's a URL that's pointing to something locally on your particular Chrome. I'm talking. There's a doc drop link is the one I use. Then it's got a big long password URL after it.
Okay.
I think it does. That's the one that you would need to share for somebody to actually see the book.
Okay, because my guess, whoops, that's not right.
And typically I tend to have a local copy on my computer and annotate that.
Right.
But because the fingerprint is the same as the fingerprint of the other copy, all the annotations match up.
Right. Yeah, see, I see. Yeah, so it does point to my download file. Okay, so I see how that's working. I just stuck it in the chat. Just so that I could see the whole thing all in one place. Okay, well, yeah, we'll figure out how to do that. There was one, actually, there was one technology thing that we had talked about at the end of the previous, oops, don't be stepping on my keyboard. At the end of the previous session, that was the second thing, and a couple people got together, and I was planning to, and then I got sick, so I didn't. Tracy, my understanding was that kind of didn't go anywhere that we have to worry about right now. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I don't think we're ready to try it for this go round.
Okay.
I mean, we did some pretty good experimentation with it, and Justin really is the one who, and Simon, and Gregory, kind of the four of us were working on it. It's a very interesting plugin. The plugin author is very responsive, already fixed a bug that we ran across. I think it's, what it basically does is allows you to share something from your vault into kind of a group space, and then other people can comment. So there's no collaborative note taking like our, where we have comments right in a note, or we're able to have a collaborative note like our community forum. You couldn't do that with that setup, or with that. The plugin does not allow that, but it does allow, it has a nice commenting system on other notes that people share. And you can share things right out of your regular vault, and it's still safe because no one's going to be messing with your note. So it's a very interesting experiment. I think it probably won't work this time around, but it is something that we should kind of maybe keep in the background and can maybe discuss in terms of, an Obsidian plugin sort of tech aid for, maybe going forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I realized I had the PDFs, I was annotating them in the book club, and I realized I shouldn't share all my highlights with you. So I just unsaved those files, and I apologize. Just delete my highlights, whoever has permission. Yeah, I've never used Hypothesis. So if anyone has any, like the specific link or like a guide to how to do it or whatever. And otherwise I'll probably just have my own version of the books, and either electronic or hard copy, so.
Okay. Yeah. Usually the way I do it is save, like Chris, I like to have a local copy. I download documents, and I do this, in my classes, with my students, with articles out of JSTOR or whatever, we'll download them. And then the beauty of it is that you can kind of, once a bunch of people are on there, you can kind of begin a discussion, by kind of looking at what people are doing and commenting on people's comments and things like that. And that is, maybe analogous to kind of what we were thinking of doing with Second. So yeah. So Chris, since you really kind of did quite a bit with this, do you want to kind of get us started on this thinking outside the brain section? Your thoughts about it?
Sitting here typing away furiously, trying to beat your vamping intro. So I mostly come at it from a perspective, and I don't know, I'm sure I probably did at some point. I did a search for the word orality. Because I come at it from how have indigenous peoples and even peoples from Western culture use speaking and orality and a non-literate mode of movement and talk and speech as it dovetails with how we use our memories, which to a great extent, I think a lot of this book is about in some sense. So I really, to me, I'm looking for the bits and pieces where she's talking, and I'm, to my knowledge, I think she doesn't mention anything about any of the areas of research that I do, and is coming at it totally from a Western perspective. Although lots of pieces that she's talking about are things that have long existed in indigenous cultures, and in particular, one of the longest traditions is in Aboriginal Australians, who use things like dance and song as external pieces of their memory. So I'm kind of following along, and I have read or am aware of a good number of the pieces the journals she's citing, although I don't think I've read all of them, but a good number of them I've run across at some point or another. So she's doing a really good job of that, although it took me forever to notice. She has some relatively extensive notes in the back of the book. They're just horribly linked. So from a publishing perspective, I hate her publisher with the burning passion of 5 white hot suns. So if you haven't noticed that yet, there are some really great notes in the back. They're just really just not linked at all. The ebook version could have been incredibly much better.
Yeah, it does seem like a missed opportunity.
And that's one of my primary focuses of hate. But I'll admit to doing good UI for footnotes in the variety of electronic books these days is not an easy thing. So I'll give maybe a little bit of a pass, but it took me a while before I actually know. I'm like, she's referencing these things and I know they exist and I know what some of them specifically are, but where's the mention of them? Like, she's just and knowing she's a journalist and a science communicator, often they'll leave those things out and presume that you're just trusting them. But in this case, she actually did the work. Her publisher just chose, or editor just chose not to show that work very well.
Yeah, I'm scrolling through them now. I hadn't really kind of picked up on that, to tell you the truth. I really don't like that idea of the way that she links to just these little snippets of text.
Yeah, then you have to search for the text to find the thing and go back and forth. I haven't done it yet, but I'll try and make a bibliography and dump it into the thing, or put something together in a special Zotero folder or something if folks are interested in that, and cross-linking it.
Okay. Yeah, that would be. I think that it does look like there's some interesting stuff in here. It kind of struck me as when I was it struck me as all of that very sort of hyped work done around like retrieval practice, right? There are a couple of them, and they're sort of, they're almost, they've taken kind of this academic stuff and they've almost, sort of made it into like Austin Kleon, kind of format, right? That is very, motivational, and it's supposed to get you, kind of excited about trying to. So there's a lot of, it struck me that there's a lot of marketing in this. But what about this? One of the reasons that we were kind of, I think, initially attracted to this was kind of this this idea about embodied knowledge, right? So, Anne, you want to talk about that a little bit? Looks like you were reacting.
I was looking up who Austin Kleon is, because I did not know, and now I know very slightly. But I think I probably had quite a similar reaction to the book for that reason. I'm not too sure, to be honest, because my I should have said, I'm very interested in full recognition because I'm dyslexic and I am 35 years old and I am yet to come across good descriptions of what being dyslexic is. And so I come to, it took a long time, but reading various things, following various people on Twitter, kind of arrived at like embodied cognition as being like the thing that started to make some stuff make sense for me. So like things that I personally feel and things that other dyslexic people feel that are very badly described by non-dyslexic people who describe dyslexia. So the real embodied one for me is lots of us who are dyslexic have no sense of left and right. I have no sense of left and right, and I make this joke that me and my people, like my family, culturally don't use left and right, and I make this joke of it, but like I'm being deadly serious. I have no conception of that, unless I'm sitting at a piano. I learned piano when I was a kid, and suddenly like I do know what left and right is but not because of the reasons I think that non-dyslexic people do, but if I'm sitting at a piano, I know this hand is going to do stuff. So eventually I realized I needed to go look at the embodied cognition literature to look at that. I think so. I come to this as a beginner and a lay person and like that literature. But I think the things that frustrate me about this book is that I think people are better served by going to some of the original literature on this stuff. So the book that really did it for me and bringing on my own understanding of embodied cognition is Lakoff and Johnson, The Myths We Live By, which talks about metaphor basically and conceptualization based on metaphor. So yeah, the other thing that really got to me is that the book has the same title as Clark and Chalmers' original paper on extended mind, and it's 13 pages long, and I think people should really go read that and start from there, because all of the people who are in the West, certainly, who are very active in this area, they're all writing like really excellent, like accessible books, and that's what's kind of interesting to me, because like compared to Anna and Blair's book, like people, I went on the Goodreads for that, and people are like, oh, this is only of interest to people who are like very, very interested in like the history of the book or intellectual history or what have you. And it's like, actually, I thought it was brilliant, and I got a lot out of it. Like I didn't know about the history of the book. I don't know who Conrad Gessner was. All of these people like really had no idea, but like I can come to it and read it and get something out of it. So yeah, I think in general, this is the kind of book that I'm trying to read a bit less of, because it feels very well promoted, but I can go find other sources and have a bit of a better job. And then the thing that really sort of didn't sit very well with me was this idea of, she has this idea of operationalizing the idea of embodied cognition, and I just really don't like that. Kind of as a scientist, like if you take something like gravity, like gravity has, we now know how gravity works, but like we were using gravity before we knew how it worked, and I think we use extended cognition, we use embodied cognition, even though we don't necessarily or didn't necessarily have like the psychological framework or the philosophical framework to know how it worked. So I was a bit frustrated with the idea that it's very new and that you can like go ahead and operationalize it, because I'm just like, it like for me, especially coming back to this dyslexia business, like I read this stuff and it actually helps quite a bit explain my existing experiences that I just didn't have a framework to explain. So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, actually what you said about sitting at the piano. So and the metaphors. So is left associated then metaphorically with sort of rhythm and right with melody then somehow?
Just like everything about being at the piano. What is so funny, because like when I was a kid, I was doing music exams, and you go to a music exam, and in the UK you have to do scales, and so there'll be like right hand C major scale or whatever it is. Anyway, so there was this one time I got disability accommodations for my music exam, and the examiner like, the thing is, if you say left and right to me at a piano, I just know because they're doing such different things, and it's that level of practice that you have at the piano, and like you're sitting at the piano is this great big linear thing, and it's like the left hand is associated with the bass notes and the bass clef, and the right hand is associated with the, I can only do that because I'm thinking of the piano in front of me, by the way. There we go. But yeah, I had this disability accommodation, and the examiner started waving. He decided not to use left disability accommodation for a dyslexic person because we don't know, but we do know when we're at the piano. And so the examiner was there, like waving his hand, this hand, C major scale. And there was poor little me being like, we're gonna have to turn and face him. Is it this way or is it?
Right.
And so that kind of thing. And so I think without the idea that that is a form of I think maybe I should call it embedded cognition, the idea that I'm situated at the piano and it makes sense to me. Without that kind of framework, it's actually quite difficult to explain, and people think that they're helping dyslexic people. It's just like, that makes no sense. Anyway, so that's why I really like this stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm also curious about this this idea that maybe there is as I'm kind of scrolling through the introduction, I'm thinking, well, okay, there seems to be this need to set up a, I don't know, I don't want to call it a straw man, but I'll call it a straw man, against which to present this new perspective, right? So that there is a kind of a way that in general we understand these things. We understand that whole kind of use your head, metaphor that she sort of starts with. That so maybe that's overdone. That the need to but again, if this is something that the goal is to popularize, and there are still people kind of thinking about it that way, then maybe it's effective for some for part of an audience. What do other people think?
What did you mean by that, Dan? Use your head.
Well, she starts out the very beginning in the introduction, right, with this where is it? Is it the introduction or the preface? Introduction, yeah. Use your head. How many times have you heard that phrase, right? As kind of how she begins. That that thinking happens inside the head, right? And that it's not extended at all. It's not. And I think that there has been. I think that for people who have been paying attention, right, there's been all of these different things, the gut and, all of these other areas of sensation and memory and all of that kind of stuff. But maybe for people who haven't been paying attention, and maybe that's the market, as people who haven't been, sort of following the science. That's all I was thinking.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's always been the gut. And as I was reading, the book earlier this week, I was thinking back and, all the different classes I've taught, and they're highly mathematical, and different than the kinds of things maybe you have taught. But I always, it triggered my memory, and I was rather than give the students the answer or just, you know, in a liturgical sense, copy what's out of the book, you know, I would tell the students, you know, like, it's like, what do you feel? You know, what's in your gut, or try to get them to feel it in some way. But I guess I always went to the gut, you know, not the head.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Well, and it's kind of weird because there have been, I mean, gosh, I'm thinking back all the way to what was his name, Matt Ripley, when he wrote about the genome. You know, he was right. You know, he had a chapter in there about, you know, sort of the well, I think it was mostly about epigenetics, but he sort of touched on this idea that, you know, that part of our our mental world happens, you know, and, you know, like counting neurons in different, you know, these different systems and things like that. But again, I'm always very interested in where, you know, sort of where the metaphor ends and where the science begins. And so I think that that this Louise Barrett Beyond the Brain thing might, you know, in its more rigor, you know, might be interesting to me because it may, you know, kind of be more factual and less, you know, and less dependent on this, you know, on this metaphor, you know, because we've got this, you know, this long-term, you know, kind of a cultural metaphor of the gut. So, you know, so that was very convenient. But does that sort of impact the way we understand it and bias us towards understanding it a particular way? That's just something that kind of, you know, I'm always kind of interested in. Does the metaphor end? Can we think without metaphor? Yeah.
Even jumping off of that, it's and I'm curious too, because there's several educators here, and she goes through and she's breaking it down in some sense by journal articles and applications and tying them together. So there's a section on movement, you know, and then there are sections that cover other pieces. But I'm coming at it from a much more holistic perspective, looking at it from an orality perspective, where cultures and tribes use these kind of extended memory things all together in a big jumble. So they would use song and dance and art and visual displays all at the same time. And all of it becomes so heavily and deeply embedded into the culture that when you, let's say when you see the sun was associated with very specific things. So when you see a picture of it or a version of it, it's going to evoke in your memory things that will remind you of what's going on. So when you're looking around, and probably the best way to explain it to people in Western cultures is when you watch movies like there's a Spielberg Tom Cruise movie where he's out hunting people and he's got this imaginary visual display in front of him and he's moving it around like it's a computer display, but he sees it and you see it. Minority Report. Yeah. So indigenous cultures are viewing the world from that perspective. They're seeing things in their mind's eye that don't exist for the people around them necessarily. Although in their case, everyone around them is taught the same things. So they're generally seeing the same types of things in their mind's eye mixed with the reality that's around them. And when you've been raised in that culture, it's hard to explain how not to. So I literally have seen, I've now got about 15 examples of cultures from around the world who use the phrase talking with rocks or some variation of it translated into English. And so there are these tribes of people who are talking about talking with rocks or pretending as if rocks can talk to them. And in English, from a Western perspective, we think they're on drugs. It's, you know, they are taking cocaine and they are on a bad trip if they think they can talk with rocks. But because of how their culture works and their memories work and the way they were taught, literally like at the kindergarten level, these rocks really are talking to them. They're just talking in a different way than you would expect in the way the English verb talk means. They're communicating with the rocks, or the rocks are communicating memories to them and evoking memories. And because of horrible translations, we think, oh, yeah, rocks don't talk, so I'm going to write off whatever they're saying. But when it's a tribe elder who says, I'm communicating with rocks because I know how to look at what they're saying now, I totally believe him and I know exactly what he's saying, but there isn't a good English verb for what that communication looks like and why. So she's kind of taking these things apart in little chunks, and I'm kind of curious what it looks like when you throw them all together and you use them in a teaching setting, so that if somebody, let's say, has dyslexia, in an oral society, nobody's going to notice that you're dyslexic because there are no words to do that. But would they notice that you have this issue of left versus right, or is there even a conceptualization of that? I think in some languages they use directions, or what we would think of as the points of the compass rose.
Yeah, that I think that's
specific
what
meanings.
The orientation thing is very interesting, I think, for that reason, because there are examples. Yeah, I think like the Wikipedia article for the orientation is so bad, because it starts out as like everyone knows left and right, blah, blah, blah. It's a huge issue for surgeons in the West because do you want to have your left or your right kidney removed? Anyway, it's a huge field of research. But then you get like 2/3 down the article and they specify Aboriginal Australians like don't have left and right concepts. Like it's specific to a group that I can't remember the name of. My bad. But yeah, they use East and West, and like how this is related to like the sun, for example, and like and like how it's related to the places where you live and you grow up, and the like island and stuff like that. Anyway, I don't have the details, so I'll that. But yeah.
Well, kind of the external physicality of things is really interesting. This week, actually, in my historical methods class, we talked about, and it wasn't my week; it was my partner's week, and so he assigned he was doing material rather than oral historical work, and so he assigned a journal article called "Beyond Words" by Leora Auslander, and which is relatively recent. It's only about 17 years old, and it was interesting because there is in there that there are statements sort of about our need for objects, and she tries to make this case of a kind of a physical universality of humans, right? That there's, that we're born, we die, we start out little and dependent, and all of these things, that we have in common, and so there is kind of a and really, I think in this article, what she's trying to do is kind of argue against sort of the extreme cultural relativism of, postmodernism, and say, well, there are some things that we can hang our hats on. But even that, that statement, right, there's a need for objects, right? Well, there isn't the same need for objects in all cultures, right? We were, the stuff that we were reading in Graeber and Wengrow, right? That was a completely different sort of understanding of stuff, and of things. I mean, and that's why, in American history, we sort of misunderstood wampum as money, right? Because, we have this idea about things and property and all of that.
I have a feeling, I don't have enough evidence to back it up yet, but I have a feeling that things like beads and particularly strung together beads that were known as wampum were actually 10 times more valuable. The problem is the culture's memories are associated with specific patterns within that wampum and those beads and the patterns. And it's, I haven't looked in closely enough to the North American tribes, but definitely that same pattern is seen in the quipu of the Incans.
Sure.
And they use that as essentially a form of writing, but you had to know how to decipher it. Mm-hmm. And even archaeologists now haven't done an incredibly good job of doing it, but it's patently obvious they were associating memories with those things.
Right.
So the passing along of those items had tremendous value, but the value is also inherent in being taught how to read them after you had received them. Mm-hmm. And sadly, Western culture has never stayed around or stuck with it long enough to receive the value of the wisdom that went with them. So they were just viewed as, oh, they're trinkets.
Well, and we're never interested in, in the meaning of these things, right? So the pattern on, on a wampum belt turned into, sort of inadvertently turned into cryptography, right? It means something, but, we don't know the code. So, yeah. But coming back to this, or do we want to jump over to the beginning of Too Much to Know?
Can I say one thing about it?
Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. So one of the things that you get from the original paper, Clark and Chalmers' Extended Mind, is that they end by saying, like, to talk about what you were saying as well, that there's a moral, essentially, if our cognition is extended to the objects around us, then that has not only epistemological implications, it has moral implications. And I find that downplayed, I feel, in Annie Murphy-Paul's work. And I think that's essential and kind of speaks to what you're talking about how people see these objects differently.
Yeah, I think there was a moment there that I noted down, it was around page 14, let's see if I can find it, where she's talking, because I wrote down, actually the note that I wrote was obvious, but has moral implications. She's actually talking about Clark and Chalmers, and she's talking about this extended system coupling biological organism and external resources. Well, yeah, if there's external resources and there's differential access to them, yeah, of course. But I I'm going to go into JSTOR and see if I can grab a permanent URL for that article. Do we want to keep talking about that, or do we want to move to the other, to information management?
Although before we do move, I'm kind of curious how, and it's a personal question, so just blow me off if you want to, Anne. But I'm curious how good a dancer you are.
I'm happy to answer that. I'm one of the dyslexic people who has other neurodivergencies. I think I'm dyspraxic. I'm terrible, really, really terrible. So, yeah. But this is the thing. There are other. So there's some dyslexic people who have this wonderful dance consultancy now called Move Beyond Words. That's super interesting for all of this stuff. So I would recommend checking out that stuff.
I wish I had a word for why I can't dance well, but now I can say I'm dyslexic maybe, and that's why, and that'll explain it.
I also can't dance, but I think it is probably about my ego more than anything else. If I had to put it on something. So I discovered that the term information age was coined in the year of my birth, which was interesting to me. And, just for a second, and then I decided that wasn't worthy of an annotation. So I guess I'm still learning how to. Oh, thank you. Yeah, my birthday is coming up in a couple of weeks. So we, yeah. So I am still kind of thinking as I'm doing this, I guess, about what is important enough to make a note of, and I think that probably. I think that that's another interesting element, maybe, of hypothesis, is it sort of lowers the bar a little bit. Although once Readwise sweeps the hypothesis annotations into the vault, maybe that complicates things even more.
I tend to try and I'll make whatever blurts exist or come up. And then I tend to sweep all of them into a fleeting notes area. And then I'll filter through and take out the best of the best and put it somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So, but from if you're in hypothesis and you do that, then suddenly now I'm going to remember what year that was and associate it with your birthday. And I'll now never be able to forget what year that happened in. So though, even if it seems like a small, tiny thing, those little personal touches and cues actually extend your memory in ways you don't expect. So, and I presume now, Dan, you will never forget what year that word was coined in.
True. Yeah. That is true. So yeah, I do think that there's that those are probably, and actually that is, I mean, that's what narrative is for in in a lot of these disciplines as well, in addition to to sort of being the way that we sort of understand the past. And so historians are obligated to not just analyze things and claim that X caused Y, but instead tell a story that sometimes maybe even just makes the claim suggestively, rather than them needing to go out and say, A plus B equals C. But then again, that becomes kind of problematic and complicated, right? Because then then are you really, are you getting more mileage out of a good narrative than you should be? Is your claim more, more compelling? And I think that's, I think, that's a way to look at the, the issue that the Paul book has. It's, not making a dispassionate argument. It's doing a sales job. Do you all find that the mnemonic tools used by cultures mirror the byline? Well, that was one of that. Yeah, Tracy, that's one of the things that interested me about, sort of finding, as this, what Stan was talking about the gut, and it was reminding me of these discoveries. Oh, all of a sudden there's a lot of science about we're finding out how many neurons there are in the gut, and now and so we've got we've got a validation. If we didn't have that cultural tag already, I mean, I guess one could argue that it's not just a metaphor, that there is a real, I mean, and that's the way the sort of the evolutionary determinists do it, right? They say, these are, like Taleb is always saying, it is this way because we're wired this way. It was evolutionary. And he gets that from maybe Kahneman or somebody, right?
Trying to take apart some of Tracy's question, but I know, and I'm in the midst of a book that's just come out now, literally in the last month, called The First Astronomers, and it's written by an American who has moved to Australia and has a background in astronomy and then a PhD in archaeoastronomy. And he talks about the Torres Strait Islanders and their knowledge of science. And so, and a big part of his book and his point is that these indigenous cultures have a massive amount of astronomical research and actual physical science. The problem is it's hard to see because of the way it's passed down orally. But he's able, as a professional astronomer and a scientist, to look at the knowledge they've got and tie the two and bridge those two worlds together. And I think that's getting at some of what Tracy's asking, but I'm not sure if that's completely what her question is. But I think the West writes off a lot of that indigenous science because we can't see it and we don't understand how they do it and how it's applied. And primarily because it's not written down for us to read and play with.
Mhm.
I think I might be able to speak to some of Tracy's question as well. Like, that's really interesting, Chris. That looks like a really interesting book. For mnemonic tools. So Mary Douglas has this book called Thinking in Circles, which is about this thing called a ring composition for literary texts. But there's some evidence, I think, that she presents in that book about ring compositions, I want to say in China, being like tortoise shell, like the shell of a tortoise. So the idea with a ring, do you know about this as well, Chris? Have you come across ring compositions?
I haven't come across that specifically, but there are some patterns and designs in Celtic cultures, I think, that are similar.
So like a ring composition is like an extended version of biblical chiasm. And Mary Douglas's book is basically about how that helps you to like how the structure of the story helps you to both remember the story, and then there's that link with the tortoise shells for some cultures, and then also that the way that the story is put together has meaning as well, in addition to just the text of the story. And those are quite interesting because people come across, because Mary Douglas's whole book is basically about how people come across them and they don't understand them because they don't know what the story is doing because the structure is so different. Anyway, so that's super interesting. So I think probably quite a lot of examples of that.
Equivalent, I think, in Aboriginal cultures in Australia is the idea of the song line, and they'll take those types of things and moving across the country in the space tells a story as you move across the land that does that same sort of function. And that's one of the reasons why things like, the British show up and put fences everywhere and make it hard to move across the land literally kills the culture, because that's what it's based on. Mm-hmm. But I think that's a similarity. There are some other similarities I know of in African cultures that have been documented that do that same thing, but I've never run across that. So thanks for that reference. And that's awesome.
Or what happens when the story becomes corrupted to the point where, is there a point at which the tags, the memory tags, associated with the story no longer operate, right? That they don't trigger the same sort of things. One of the things that also from this introduction that I was curious about was that she distinguishes between data, which she says requires further processing before it can be meaningful, and knowledge, which implies an individual knower. So there's data, there's knowledge, and then she's saying that in between these two, there's information. And then, and I sort of reacted to that right at the beginning of that's at the kind of the beginning of that chapter. And I was wondering at that point, how big is this thing called data, and is it even that interesting, or this thing called information? In that sort of data is interesting and knowledge is interesting, but is information really interesting? And then by the end, we sort of get to this moment where she's talking about the, you know, the growth of these, you know, of these different types of books, right? And then she says they offer ready-made in print the kinds of notes readers wished to have available, even if they had not taken them themselves. So it's the kind of recreating that experience of being the scholar. And that sort of interested me, that what these things are sort of a Reader's Digest version of the academic experience. And that does make more space for information. What do you guys think about information, and is it possible to short circuit that process?
I highlighted and made a note at that same spot, Dan, but I associated it with there's a paper by Claude Shannon in 1948 called originally it was called A Mathematical Theory of Information, and then when it was published again a year later as a book, one of the substantive changes was primarily in the title, and it went from a theory of communication to the theory of communication, which I think is hilarious. But literally in the second paragraph of his book, he kind of separates here's the mode of communication that I'm going to describe in math, and it's all self-contained and makes sense. And the entire digital revolution we're all experiencing is built on it. And he separates that from the semantic version of this. There's this information and this data, and it's communicating something, but I'm going to separate it mathematically and physically from the semantic meaning of the thing. So what I'm saying may mean something different to everyone else on this call, because we're all coming from different semantic spaces. So I may be trying to communicate something and you're not receiving it for some reason. And that kind of split between the communication and what's actually in it is a humongous gap that I've yet to see anybody even attempt to try and solve. You know, there's lots of philosophers and, you know, people in semiotics playing around with it, but I don't think anybody's come close to an answer.
Well, and that difference potentially gets even, I think, well, and maybe I'm making a claim here that you won't agree with, but it seems to me that difference gets even more extreme when we use these external things as sort of triggers for memory, the landscape, or objects, or in this article that I had read with my class, sort of material culture, and its meaning seems to be even more subjective and more variable. So I think a big, so in the things that you've been talking about the last, and you've been, sort of consistently through the last couple of clubs, Chris, the thing that has really, sort of my reservation with it has been the, nailing down a way of seeing these things, and a way of interpreting these things that allows them to be, the places where, these memories or these ideas are encoded. Seems even more problematic than words.
Well, one of the tough parts, I think, and you mentioned it a minute ago, and I look at it as complete folly, like the fact that I could try and read a book and take out a universal set of notes from it that would apply to everybody so that everybody doesn't have to read it is insanity. And I always go back to early philosophy with Heraclitus. It's the context makes the most difference. So my river is dramatically different than your river. And, the fact that I can't even step into my same river twice and have it be the same river is dramatically different. So when I take notes on something, when I take notes on this section that we just mentioned, I'm thinking about Claude Shannon in 1948, and you're thinking about something totally different.
Right.
And so there's no way for me to take notes on this thing in a way, unless you're just reading the original thing.
Right.
But I may reread this book 10 years later and think something dramatically different than I do today, because I'll have a whole new context of 10 years in between.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why I never bought the whole, Luhmann claim that he never returned to a book.
Yeah. Or even your
reading trivial books then.
Your comment about, oh, I was born this year. You actually stopped in the information overload in looking at that one sentence. You had the thought, but then you actually had to ask yourself tacitly the question, do I annotate this? Do I make a note about it? Mm-hmm. So I've just gone to the knee-jerk reaction of, that's one more decision my brain doesn't want to handle. So I'm just going to annotate it and write it because I thought it, and then I'll move on and I'll do something with it later. So I'll push the cognitive problem down the road.
Kick the can out of the road.
I'll just do the thing because it will take me less time to write the note than it will to think about, is it worth it? Mm-hmm. I'll think about, is it worth it later? Yeah. But at least in the erstwhile, I've got the note.
Yeah, well, that's valuable. Yeah, I actually stopped. There was another point I stopped, was to try to determine whether Ephraim Chambers was related to Robert and William Chambers, and I wasn't able to find a connection. Apparently, they're not related. It just Chambers because Robert Chambers was an encyclopedist in Edinburgh a century later and anonymously wrote vestiges of the something of natural history, right? The 1840s evolution tract that got him into so much trouble. But he's apparently not related to Ephraim Chambers. But so that was something, that, related to my interests that I stopped at and actually went to, some sources and tried to track down. Okay, what's going on? And just a lot going on. Sometimes I see chat scrolling very quickly, and it's like, okay, let's take a minute and see what's going on in chat. Universal material objects, yeah. Okay. Is that conversation have been had in chat, or do we want to bring it to the soundtrack here? So I thought another thing that I thought was interesting was that, and I hadn't been aware that someone had counted, and that she was able to say it's not the newly recovered ancient texts that account for the size of these collections of quotations, but sort of returning to the ancient authors that they had already had access to, the Ovids and the Horaces and the Ciceros. And that was interesting that that she did that after quoting Brian Ogilvie, who's now the chair of the department that I went through at University of Massachusetts. He was the guy who let me into grad school. But that metaphor again, or that analogy about the number of bugs. Struck me as kind of interesting. So what about this information management in antiquity, in this Western antiquity of writing? I have to admit, I didn't really get to the comparative part. So I need to spend a little bit more time with that.
I love mostly the hidden histories of things we just totally take for granted. You know, the fact that you can pull out an encyclopedia and what is it and why is it? Or even how do you, I think it was, or probably one of the best explanations I've seen was Simon Singh's The Big Bang, where he looks at the body of physics knowledge that we have and talks about how over time it concatenates into smaller and smaller pieces, and eventually we'll come up with more comprehensive theories that take the huge body of knowledge we knew before and the amount of work it took, let's say Newton's gravitation, or his broad philosophy, and then Einstein can come along and concatenate it into a smaller package that explains the same thing, not only in a better way, in a more elegant way. But I don't know that necessarily fits. I see those patterns in physics and math frequently. I don't always see them in the arts and the humanities so much. Though to me, those tend to just keep expanding and expanding rather than concatenating.
Are you saying that the thing that's relevant there is that in general relativity, Newton's gravity is just a subset of a bigger thing, or that the things that we pay attention to in Newton's work are sort of circumscribed by its place in the new paradigm?
Well, it helps to have the framing of both, and one informs the other. But 400 years from now, are we going to teach kids that Newton even existed, or are we just going to say, you don't have the time to learn about Newton anymore, so we're just going to teach you about this Einstein bit that's going to explain all the other parts above and beyond it? And to some extent, as I'm reading this, I'm reading it specifically because I want to know these bits of history, because over the span of the 20th century, we have lost, as both a culture and as educators, we've lost the idea of what a commonplace book is, or the evolution of that into what a Zettelkasten is. And those things have come back now, and a lot of people are picking them up as tools for actually reusing them again in modern life. But because of educational reforms, and we have to concatenate and compress things, we don't have time to teach you subjects in school now, so we're going to leave things out and hope for the best.
Yeah. Well, and Thomas Kuhn actually had some things to say about that, about the way that science is taught to new science students, undergrads or grad students or whatever, right? They don't take the time to learn Newton, right? They learn the things that we kept from Newton, which does kind of argue for science history being kind of legitimate, because then it's left for speculative fiction writers like Neil Stephenson, right, to write about what a crazy guy Newton was, and speculatively kind of put him in a room with Leibniz and examine the things that were at stake there, and of course not as rigorously as probably ought to be done, but that was where I was exposed to it, right? Not in a science format. Right. And we probably don't think that that stuff is relevant to the ideas, but we might be wrong about that. That the life of Newton, might have been you know, and especially if we, especially to whatever extent we use the ideas of Newton's science metaphorically, then the context in which they arose might be even more interesting and relevant.
I think we give a lot of credit to Newton for his physics. And if you walk into any first year physics course, you'll still see mechanics being taught. And of course, every STEM major takes calculus. But we do not teach Newton's symbolism or symbols of calculus at all. In fact, it could be argued that his system of calculus set England back 100 years. Whereas research that in the Europe continent followed Leibniz and in fact advanced much further than that. So they had to let go of it. So now today we teach Leibniz's symbols. We never label it that. So maybe in that sense, you're thinking that we've sort of lost the tag. But yeah, when we're teaching these direct classes, we don't touch the history of these people. And in fact, you know, half of Newton's professional life was devoted to, well, some would call it nonsense now, alchemy. So.
Yeah. But actually, I do mention that, John. But I do mention that, you know, when I teach modern world history, that, you know, Leibniz, you know, because when I talk about the Enlightenment, I talk about, you know, these big names, and I do say that they had this argument over, you know, over the, you know, over who, or, you know, who the originator of the calculus was, and I do say that, you know, that the stuff that we use is mostly from Leibniz. But yeah, you're right. I don't contextualize that in the context that you just did with, you know, I don't talk about the consequences for science moving forward, you know, of you know, the Europeans kind of having that head start or that leg up or that advantage of that, you know, of that way of thinking about it. So yeah, I mean, I think those are, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of context that gets lost. As information, you know, and maybe that goes back to that question about, you know, data, knowledge, information in the center. Anyway, what's going on in the chat? What happened at Chicago? Oh, cool. Okay. Leibniz and universal languages. Yeah, he does. Yeah, he was looking for a universal character or something, wasn't he? Oh, New York Times 3 articles. Okay, so maybe I will be, I don't know if I've hit my limit. If I haven't hit my limit yet, I'll try to get that and maybe PDF it. Nope, I hit my limit too. Thank you, New York Times. Okay, so we seem to be out of time. So I think there's probably a little bit more to say about these things, but why don't we, you know, kind of continue this conversation in the vault, and you know, and that way other people will be able to kind of pick it up as well and kind of see what we did. And I will post a video of this so that folks who weren't able to attend will see it, and then hopefully next Saturday we'll have an even bigger group. All right.
What's our reading targets for next time?
What's that? Sorry?
What's our reading targets for next time?
Next time, I think we were going to look at the Thinking with Our Surroundings section and the Note-Taking as Information Management chapter. So that would be like 3 chapters of Paul, 1 chapter of Blair. Okay, and yeah, and we can use the individual notes section of the vault to kind of start our own. I mean, I'm going to do probably the you know, kind of the thing that I normally do, which is the long scroll of reading notes, and then try to start picking out individual ideas that I want to focus on. And I may do a journal thing because Anne, you did a really cool, kind of cool journal thing in the first one that inspired me. So yeah. All right, cool. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Dan.
Before we-